Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our AI panel on hype versus hope, and the question of how can we adopt AI, generative AI, in a way that is good for workers, but is also creating public value. I'm really excited about this panel because in our AI work at IPPR, we're, I guess, summing up our view on this is like, yes, but what exactly? So our thing is like, yes, AI has huge potential to boost the economy, but how exactly can that take place? And yes, it could pose risks, but what exactly are these risks and how do we need to prepare for them? And yes, policy can help to encourage it, but what exactly should it do? So I feel like sometimes the debate stays slightly superficial, and at this panel we want to do exactly this. We want to say, yes, risks and opportunities are there, but what exactly is going on? We're at IPPR, we've started a whole work stream on IPPR where we use cutting-edge AI data science techniques to inform some of our work. So we're both commenting on it, but we're also doing some cool work with AI itself. And Bhargav, my colleague, will speak a little bit about this. But before we get going with the panel, I just wanted to do a quick audience question on where you all are with regards to AI. So first of all, who here uses generative AI, like ChatGPT, Claude, Perplexity, at least once per week? Right, okay, so about half. Okay, who here uses it for about more than 1 hour per week? Okay. So about like four or five people. Okay, very interesting. And now, in terms of opportunities, who thinks generative AI is going to be awesome for their job or for their sector? Okay, that's about like maybe a fifth, slightly less. In terms of risks, who thinks this could be devastating for their sector? Okay, about the same amount. Okay, great. I'm glad we cover both the risks and opportunities in this panel. Okay, let me now introduce our panel, which is really exciting. So we have Chionwura coming shortly, who chairs the DCIT committee. I'll introduce her when she's here. Then we have Brittany Smith, who is the UK policy and partnership lead at OpenAI, obviously one of the pioneers and leading firms in this space. And she's worked on sort of policy questions around equity, civil society engagement, racial justice for many, many years at Schmidt Futures, at the Data and Society Research Institute, at Google, DeepMind, so brings in a lot of sector expertise. Then we have Professor Danushka Bolegala, who is Professor of Computer Science at the University of Liverpool. Thank you also for supporting this event. And he's worked on a lot of natural language processing problems and is lecturer at the School of Information Sciences at the University of Tokyo and Japan, as well as a scholar for Amazon Research. So also brings the research and also applied expertise. Then we have James Plunkett, who is the Chief Practices Officer at Nesta and the Behavioral Insights team. And he's not just on top of the AI world, but he's for a decade worked on digital transformation and public policy. So he's very much thinking about how can we use technology to make public services better and deliver public value, including stints at Number 10, at the Cabinet Office, as well as at the Resolution Foundation. And he's written a book, End State, that explores how we reform the state for a digital age. He will do signatures after the talk. And finally, my colleague Bhargav Srinivasa Desikan, who is a research fellow at IPPR. He's written a book on natural language processing, is writing a second book on AI, so has like a computer science background, is published in journals like Nature, where he looks at the sort of the social implications of, or like sociological analysis using AI tools in a large text context. So very distinguished panel. And let's go straight in and go in on the hype versus hope question. So I think a lot of people, when you talk to them about AI, they're like, yes, tools like ChatGPT, they can write funny poems, but aren't they mostly wrong and making stuff up? And so my first question to you, Danushka, is what were you surprised by in terms of AI progress we've been making recently? And what would you say to those people that it's just making stuff up?
Yeah. Thank you first inviting me for this panel. So I've been working on natural language processing for the last 15 to 20, close to 15 to 20 years. When I started work, I was working on text summarization. But now I find both news articles are written as well as summarized by large language models. So over the those 15 years, I've seen a lot of progress in large language models. And they are quite impressive in the sense that they are very generic models which we can use for various different tasks, which are very minor, like instructions provided using a prompt and so on. So I've seen, for example, applications as you might also be using it for maybe writing programming code. So mostly like writing programming code these days is just describe what you want to implement in plain English. And then the initial prototype will be developed for you, and then you can maybe minor tweak it and execute it and find out. So there are also examples of, for example, uploading an image and getting interpretations for that. So I've uploaded, for example, the diagrams that I use during my lectures. And then ChatGPT would give me a very good explanation as to what this background of this picture is and how it is developing. And even from an educational point of view, so there we have challenges as well because students are using some of these tools to write answers to assignments. But on the other hand, you can get immediate feedback on things that you do. And these are also very, very good applications. So I think there are lots of opportunities to have. Recently, for example, the AI scientist model that is developed by Sakana AI, a startup company in Japan working on AI. So that does the full length of doing the surveys, exploring different methods, implementing the code, and writing the research paper. So the entire pipeline is being automated. So it's also a kind of a risk for us who have been doing this type of research and publishing papers. So you can see the level of, there are also mathematicians like Terence Tao using these AI tools to help automation of certain mathematical proofs. So it's quite an exciting field, and there are a lot of opportunities to have. And related to the second part of the question, where you asked about aren't these tools making mistakes, producing biased responses, and so on? It is indeed the case. That is, these things are there. But on the other hand, I'm also working on topics like social bias detection and mitigation of these models. So we do actively research on this. If you see, for example, hallucinations have been reduced significantly over the last few months. So these challenges do exist, but also there's a large, broad community working on improving these tools.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And I actually would encourage, in terms of hallucinations, I would encourage everyone to use generative AI in their field and check how good the results are. And it's actually quite surprising how little things these models now make up and how useful they are. But for now, let me welcome to the stage Chiyo Onwura, who is the chair of the DCIT Committee for Science, Innovation and Technology, who has a long interest in tech issues and is, in fact, an engineer who, before entering Parliament for 20 years, has worked on engineering projects around the world. And I think I read before this panel, you went to the Democratic National Convention, so you also have an interest in international politics, so clearly a very important international dimension to AI policy as well. So maybe we can talk about that in a moment. So welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry I was late.
Great. Before I come to you, let me quickly. So we're still talking about what are actually the capabilities of generative AI, right. And Danushka concisely explained that. Let me bring it over to Brittany for what's actually coming down the tracks, because this is, even the last year, we've seen much more capable models coming online. We've had AI assistants starting to emerge. So the question is, Brittany, where do you see AI development going? What are the sort of models and products that are kind of going to come out in the next year or two?
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Brittany. I lead UK policy at OpenAI. Maybe you know already, but I'll say anyway, OpenAI was started as a nonprofit in 2015. We research, develop, and release cutting-edge AI tools and best practices for the safety, alignment, and governance of AI. Our goal is not to sell the most of anything. We don't have an ads-based business model. Our goal is to work toward a world in which everyone can benefit from the social, economic, and technological advancements of AI. So first, on this question about hype, I wanted to come in because we share some responsibility for there being quite a lot of enthusiasm and excitement about capabilities and wider social transformation. I think it's really important to moderate some of the hype that's going on, just because the pace of scientific progress, not just in the context of AI, but in any field, is very hard, if not impossible, to predict. And one of the things, if we let expectations get away from us, particularly in a way that's misaligned from model capabilities, is that it leads to disappointments and misunderstandings, and people giving up too soon on what is, quite frankly, going to be a really hard but worthwhile pathway between scientific breakthroughs on capabilities and adoption within government and wider society, and then scale up so that we can actually see specific and tangible benefits on people's lives. I think we're still in a very, very early stage of that pathway, and so I think that's something to be said about just framing about where we are in the hype cycle. On capabilities, where I think that we're going over the next couple of years, our recent release is instructive of that, around reasoning capabilities. So we, last week, announced a series of models that were codenamed Strawberry, but the codename leaked, and so you might already know it as Strawberry, but we are calling it O1. It's a series of models that are designed to spend more time thinking before they respond. So they can reason through complex tasks and solve harder problems in domains like coding and science and math. And when we train these models, they learn to refine their thinking process, to try different strategies, to recognize their mistakes. And they perform similarly to PhD-level students in benchmarking challenges on fields like biology and chemistry and math and physics. And so what are the implications of all this? One of them is that we expect to see more capable AI in more places and sooner, and a dramatic expansion over time of the set of tasks that AI can help us with medium and long-term possibilities for them to be performing those tasks autonomously. But again, I'm not saying all of that to sort of generate more hype. It's just to say that that is the trajectory that we are on, and that reasoning capabilities inside of models can unlock for us. Another point that I'll make, and then I'll stop, is that one thing that we think this reasoning capability unlocks for us is a new paradigm. So the previous paradigm was thinking that the bigger the model is, we need bigger supercomputers to train bigger models to have bigger capabilities. And we now think that with reasoning breakthroughs, you can get more bang for your buck out of smaller models. So you can use existing models or smaller models more efficiently and more effectively and more intensively. That doesn't mean that we don't need supercomputers anymore, that we don't need bigger models, but that there's more bang for your buck in terms of existing models because those reasoning capabilities are unlocked. So that's the trajectory that we're on, and there will be more releases from us in that vein over the next few months. So no surprises there. But there are a lot of engineers and computer scientists here that can give you a little bit more detail about what those capabilities mean.
And can you, just a follow-up question,
Yeah.
Could you hint a bit more where the journey is going in terms of AI agents? Are they going to be like more capable in what ways?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people are interested in the degree to which models can behave autonomously and make a series of complex decisions across complex domains. Right now, models aren't able to do that. They're good at current capabilities for LLMs. They are good at answering common questions, solving common problems in known domains, but they're not good at acting across domains or making decisions autonomously. And so that's a goal, that's an area of research and an area of where we collaborate with the UK AI Safety Institute on model evaluations. Model autonomy is one of the verticals that they work on alongside cyber risks and CBRN risks, et cetera. So it's an area of concern and possibility at the same time, but we are not quite there yet. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, amazing. Thank you very much. Okay, great. Let me turn to you, G. So we've heard about existing capabilities, quite powerful PhD level benchmark results of the new models, AI agents coming down the line. Now you've, of course, only just started as decent chair, so I don't expect you to have the full agenda yet. But where do you see sort of the risks and opportunities that you're thinking about with regards to AI and your work in the committee?
Okay, great. Thanks very much, and thanks very much to the University of Liverpool and IPPR, who do fantastic work in this area, for inviting me to speak today. And just to say, it's just fantastic to be in Liverpool again, but for the first time with a Labour government at a Labour conference, and talking about what looking up to what the government will do, what Labour will do, not what it could or should do. And I've spent 14 years in Parliament under a succession of Conservative governments. AI, or what is called AI, has evolved significantly in that time. And it's obviously true to say that technology is transformative now. In fact, it's the technology-driven transformation of our economy and our public services, of our NHS, of our research capabilities, of our science base, different AI, or what is called AI. Because I think the title of this, Hype or Hope, is really good. There's as much hype as there is hope with AI, and it's almost always the case with new technologies, is that they go through like a sort of a burst of hope, and then what's called a sort of valley of despondency when people get more familiar with them and some of their implications. But I do think we have the opportunity for a technology transformation, and I know that in the DCIT team, the fact that our champions like Peter Kyle, the Secretary of State, and Ferrell Clark, our AI Minister, are absolutely resolute in their commitment to making sure we all feel the benefits of AI. And so when it comes to securing the benefits, and that's something I feel really strongly as an engineer and as a Labour politician, that the benefits of these technologies, fantastic, can do amazing things. Can all have turn out more PhD students than our university system, perhaps. But it can all do all these fantastic things. But the benefits of technology have not always or have taken a lot of time to accrue to people, working people, the people of our country. And we want to make sure that advances in AI, engineering, biology, and other, a lot of them are interrelated, are to the benefit of people. And that's why I went into engineering all those decades ago. It's the same reason I went into politics, was because I believed we want to make the world work better for everyone. And so in terms, so the committee does not exist yet. I'm the chair, but the committee has to, the members of the committee have also to be elected. But what I said when I was running to be the committee, and I was running to be elected by members of Parliament, who are, I would think, one of the most difficult electorates. So I had to set out very clearly what I was thinking about, and I said that we would focus on, or I would want us to focus on. There's a cross-party consensus about the relationship between innovation and growth. And that's the mission, the primary mission of this government, and we need to scrutinize and hold the government to account on that relationship between innovation and growth. And obviously AI has a huge potential role to play there, if it's adoption to increase productivity in different sectors, if it's to drive automation and machine learning so as to drive great new and fantastic applications and services. I said we'd also be looking at under-discussed or underperforming areas of science policy, and I don't think AI is really an under-discussed, and it's not yet underperforming, I would say. When underperforming, for example, diversity in technology and science, which is talked about a lot, but certainly underperforming because we're not much better at it than we were when I was at Imperial, where 10% of engineering students were women. And then the third area we would look at was areas of public interest in science policy, because for a number of reasons, but I think Parliament needs to be better and more influential at talking about science, innovation and technology. Because if we're not embracing technology and innovation, how can we possibly expect our constituents to do that? But we're often reluctant to. You see debates about science, innovation and technology aren't necessarily well attended. And I think there, AI is obviously an issue of public interest, whether it's with regards, so that's to, and one of the things I'm really sad about as an engineer is that, my constituents see technology often as something to fear, like they fear it's going to take AI is going to come along and take their jobs, which I think, IPOPR have done some work on the impact. I think we also need to look at the issue which was highlighted this summer over the algorithmic driving of misinformation and disinformation, and how that drives the profits of certain social media sites, and yet we don't have visibility on that. But the consequences are definitely in the public interest when it comes to riots in Hartlepool, for example. And so the last Science Committee considered did an interim report onto AI, and looked at skills and education and horizon scanning. So those are issues that the government is looking to address, some already, through Skills England to provide leadership in this space. We have a New Deal for working people to look at the empowerment, rights and security at work more broadly. AI is obviously an issue there, and the industrial strategy that Johnny Reynolds and Rachel Reeves will be bringing about in next month. So, those are some of the criteria for what we would look at. I think that we need to embrace AI if we are to have all the benefits for it, and that means that there needs to be a sort of regulatory environment which makes people feel secure, and that they understand it's a tool that's going to be in everyone's benefits, and that's what I'd hope the committee could contribute to.
Amazing, thanks very much. And I'm looking forward to shortly, maybe we can talk a bit more about policy levers and what this regulatory environment perhaps could look like. But before that, I'd like to turn it to Bhargav. So we've heard a lot that, there's a lot of consensus on AI being, potentially very good for the economy, boosting growth. Now, you're obviously doing a project on this at the moment. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what you find and where you see the landscape on where is AI being deployed at the moment, and what is it the right kind of deployment that will get us that growth that we all want?
Sure, yeah. Thanks everyone for sharing, very insightful. In a sense, you can think of what we're trying to do is to distill this question of hype and hope in a way, and to be able to kind of approach this, we need to think of what kind of public policy frameworks or approaches can we take to, in a short way, get the most public value and avoid as much societal or economic harms. So, given this kind of broad incentive, one way we can actually go about doing this is finding out what kind of AI is actually being used in this country, how is it being used, who's coming up with it, what's already been done so far in the field. There's reports by Tech UK, McKinsey, Amazon, all on adoption. So how are different firms, companies, people also across the country, how are they using these tools? But that still actually doesn't quite get us to this question of, what kind of value we can potentially create. We have to kind of look into the innovators in that sense. And in this case, that would be the firms or startups that exist in the UK their primary function is to develop AI in one way or the other. So, this can either look at adoption, that, they're trying to get others to use AI, or they're trying to come up with scientific breakthroughs in AI. So what we have seen in the adoption side of things is there's been increased adoptions. The numbers are different in all the reports, but they all point in the same direction. there's more AI being used across the country. And in terms of the sectors, it's a lot of the usual suspects in terms of telecommunication, information, finance, and some construction as well in terms of adoption. What we didn't know until we started doing the work we're doing, we are basically creating a novel data set that has a list of 3,000 something AI firms in the UK. So we actually have now like, okay, we actually can tell what's happening. And then this is where we actually use different large language model-based tools to kind of build this data set out. So we start to find out what sectors are they in, what business units are they in, and using this kind of setup, we can be like, oh, what kind of, then later, what kind of policy frameworks can we come up with for more of the good stuff and less of the bad stuff? And in this context, maybe I'll give a few examples of maybe what good might look like or what positive public value might look like. If we kind of go back at the same setup of, okay, generic adoption versus scientific breakthroughs, of course, there's also, it's not necessarily either end, but largely you can think of it as solving a niche problem. So, this could be something like drug discovery, protein folding, or it could be something more like, oh, digital transformation adoption. We're going to get, firms have come up with a platform, software, stuff like that. So given that these are, and both are important, the reason why both are important is, what's been talked about a lot is the long tail of low productivity in the country. So the supposed kind of magic bullet to this is meant to be AI, and there is some truth to this. There can be, you can imagine even in terms of, for example, figuring out your supply chain, how many things you want in stock or not, getting customers onto a platform. These things can make your kind of day-to-day business functioning better. This kind of stuff is important. But there's also multiple ways to do this. I won't name and shame, but there is a firm that, in the process of acting as a middle person, they ended up taking 30% of the profits of, of the restaurants who they were trying to get onto this platform, right? Now, this is not a good example of the kind of innovation we would like to see, even in the adoption space. So there could be kind of creativity even in adoption in a way that actually helps businesses, and it's not just the tech companies who are kind of coming out on top. And I guess the other kind of good AI might be, breakthroughs in healthcare, say in the context of medical diagnostics. It could be in the context of preventive medicine as well. So, these are kind of like the obvious ones, right? For example, climate and healthcare might be two spaces where like, okay, we need help. And so they could be used more kind of public funding in this space. So these are the kind of scientific breakthroughs part of things. And then you have the more everyday adoption, which is also unglamorous, but still important. And I think in this particular context, and of course, government isn't one body, right? Like DCIT, DWP, UKRI, they're all going to be thinking of AI in different contexts, which makes sense for them. And I think there's a bunch of policy levers that can be used for each of these cases, depending on what kind of problem you want to tackle, whether it's kind of the glamorous scientific breakthroughs or the unglamorous stuff. And I haven't even really talked about the safety or the biological terrorism parts or the kind of social biases. So even if you're just holding that on pause and just thinking of these two kind of public value, our data set kind of sheds light on what we can do in this case. We know which sectors. Even when you look at the sector-wide analysis, some sectors, healthcare, there's a lot of innovation in terms of firms innovating in it. But then there's also a really long tail when it comes to, for example, climate, forestry, and agriculture. And yeah, so we now have kind of data to basically provide government and different parts of government the kind of policy levers they might want to take. Does that kind of cover some ground?
Yeah, perfect. And it will be exciting to keep updating that over time to see how the innovation ecosystem evolves and if we have sort of a broad-based development across sectors. Okay, thank you. Now let me get, last but not least, to James Plunkett. So you've worked a lot in government on technology adoption in the public sector. So I'm curious what you've learned from past successes or failures of technology adoption, and how you're thinking about how to get public value enhancing AI adoption in the public sector right now.
Yeah, great question. So yeah, as you said, I'm interested less in the sort of frontier and more in the very messy and slow process by which these technologies then diffuse, particularly across the public sector, but not only. And I guess some reflections from history. So, I mean, one thing it's just worth naming is obviously we are in a hype cycle on AI. That's fine. We've been in lots of hype cycles before on different technologies, different waves of technology. But it's worth just kind of being aware of the kind of mistakes we often make in hype cycles. One thing I love doing recently was reading, there's an online archive of the documents that were published in the early days of the internet in the sort of early to mid 1990s. And it's a lovely read. There are lots of documents on e-government, the information superhighway, the World Wide Web, how all these things will transform the world. And I guess two things we got wrong if you sort of read through those documents. One is we thought it would be quicker than it turned out to be, because adoption is much harder and messier than we thought it would be. So there's lots of things in those documents that sort of say, you know, by the late 1990s, everyone will be doing all these things all the time. Wasn't the case. But the other is we were less ambitious, interestingly, than we could have been, and we struggled to imagine the sort of scale of transformation that would eventually unfold over 10, 15, 20 years. So there's great documents that say things like, you know, every white paper will be published on CD-ROM by the year 2005, and turned out that wasn't the case because that was a fantastically sort of low ambition for what could happen from the internet. So I think probably we'll be wrong in both those directions again, that AI will take longer to diffuse than we think, but it will be much more transformative in ways that we probably just frankly can't imagine even if we pushed ourselves to. The other thing, sort of how does that adoption then actually kind of play out in the public sector and the private sector? So I think this is on my mind recently because I've been helping my grandparents, who are 91 and 92, apply for financial support for social care. And the process is that the local council, Hertfordshire Council in our case, posted us a form printed out on paper, and we then fill out that form by hand, and we then scan the form in, attach it to an email, and post it back to the council. And this is 2024, applying for financial support for social care in the UK. So that council is now using, they were quite proud of the fact you can email them the form. So they're using technologies from about 30 years ago. And it's only recently you've been able to email the form in. And so the point being just there is about a 30-year lag between where some bits of the public sector are now in using technologies and the kind of frontier of technology. And it will be the same with AI. It will take decades to sort of to unfold. We also, though, I think, just learned a lot about the kind of ways in which you can speed up the adoption of new technologies, in that case, kind of internet-era technologies. And they get very specific. So we very effectively did things like invest in leadership, particularly kind of mid-tier leaders who really understood internet-era technologies and knew how to create the conditions within which you can make good use of the internet. We invested in infrastructure, so things like the GDS design system were incredibly effective in making it very easy to make very good websites in the public sector and spread really high-quality design standards across the public sector and made it just very easy for folk to make use of that class of technologies. We did things like investing in professions and skills, so the DDAT professional framework in government made it easy for folk to bring in the right skills to the public sector. And to some extent, we were successful building some sort of shared platforms that were then reused across the public sector. So Notify is a really powerful example of this, really powerful platform for notifying people of changes to circumstances and updates on services they're using. And that's now used by thousands of services across the public sector. So I think, again, we will be able to use some of those techniques for speeding up adoption of AI. Some of them will be the same kind of techniques we used for other technologies in earlier waves. And the only other thing I'll say on this bit is around the private sector, where actually I think the diffusion is much slower in the private sector than we often think, partly to the point about the long tail of SMEs that don't actually adopt new technologies quickly at all. And I would say last time around, if you like, with sort of internet-era tech, we were somewhat more hands-off than we could have been in helping particularly small businesses adopt new tech. And we were slower, I think, than we should have been on competition policy, to some of the points made earlier. And we allowed certain big tech platforms to come in, disintermediate firms from their customers, take 30% commission in all kinds of ways, and essentially monopolize various markets. And had we been more activist in competition policy, you might have actually seen less of those profits being captured by these monopolies essentially, and arguably more dynamism in some of those markets, although you have to be thoughtful about that. And just last reflection really, I guess, is, which is a bit of a counterpoint to what we can learn from history, is to what extent is AI different from what has come before? And I think just a couple of reflections on this, because to some extent AI is a novel family of technologies. I think one way in which AI is arguably different is the way in which it automates certain thinking tasks, essentially. And there is a risk if you automate certain aspects of thinking in our jobs, that you dehumanize those jobs and you de-skill those jobs. I was sitting in a cafe recently, and there was a teacher sitting at the next table marking a big stack of exam papers from their students. On the face of it, you might think that is a task that is very automatable, and it was pretty routine. They were just going through these exam papers and ticking and crossing and marking them. Could you automate marking those papers with AI? And you probably could, even with today's AI technologies, but would you lose something in that teacher's ability to learn how the kids are doing in their class, to recognize what the kids were finding easy and understanding and not understanding? I think you would lose something if you automated the marking of those exam papers. So we need to be really thoughtful about how AI either sort of augments the professional judgment of people or de-skills and sort of dehumanizes some of those really critical aspects of sort of learning on the job and the kind of craft of professions like being a good teacher or being a good doctor. And the last point, very briefly, is more around the sort of the paradigm of AI that has really taken all the attention, which is these very general purpose LLMs, which is where most of the hype is. I mean, I do think it's increasingly clear, and this is to some of Brittany's points, that possibly some of the biggest value applications of AI in the public sector actually aren't from these more general purpose models. Most of the money has gone into those models for commercial reasons, but arguably some of the more specialist models that are around maybe curing a particular disease or diagnosing a very particular disease, or those kind of more specific applications might yield more fruit in terms of public value. And interestingly, the general purpose models are the ones that are eating up all the compute power, having huge impacts on the environment, very demand intensive in terms of water and energy and so on, and carbon therefore. And so I do think it will be interesting, should the state be trying to encourage more specialist models in AI and try to sort of tilt the playing field to some degree away from these incredibly intensive, compute-intensive general purpose LLMs, which have been the big focus in the sort of public discourse and a lot of the investment. So arguably, I think that's a role the state should be increasingly playing.
Great, thanks very much. A lot's in there. I want to quickly pick up on one of the points and throw it back to the panel and then open to questions. So get your questions ready. But my question is going to be how different, is something on AI being different from other technologies. And I think it strikes me that a lot of the AI adoption debate treats it basically as like, when cloud computing came around, it's like, oh yeah, let's just do everything we do and just put it on the cloud and we'll be slightly more efficient. But it seems like a lot of the model advancements we're seeing is that this is actually an order of magnitude different, right? It's like basically, and as you were putting it, like expansion of the PhD workforce in the economy. It's not just like a tool that makes us make our diaries slightly more, diarizing more efficient or something like that. And Matt Clifford, who advises the government on AI adoption, he says, it's often not about using AI for your existing processes. It's about ripping up your existing processes and build them around AI. So I'm wondering if we plug these PhD students into your workflow. So I'm curious if we can just push ourselves a bit more to think big about the opportunities and risks that stem from this. And maybe Brittany, I was going to throw this incredibly hard question to you, but perhaps to bring it down a bit, what are some really ambitious applications that perhaps people using OpenAI are developing, where you're seeing like, oh, this is actually something new that we weren't able to do before that is now being used for? I don't know if you have some examples.
Okay, so yes, I'll pick up on a couple of points.
Sure.
One is that in general, I do agree with what was said just a second ago, that if you're using OpenAI models to write a clever email, you don't need reasoning capabilities. So I do think, and we actually are going to build like a model selector. So for the query that you're putting into ChatGPT, it's going to select the best model to support you with that. You don't need extended reasoning capabilities and an extended chain of thought to answer the question of like, what's the weather outside, or like write an email to my mom, which you should email your mom. Don't use ChatGPT for that. Okay, so before I answer that question, though, I wanted to pick up on something that I was just talking about with Imogen from the Ada Lovelace Institute. When she was on a panel yesterday, she said something really clever, which reflects also my experience working on AI policy for a long time. Years ago, I had this meeting with the White House when I was working in a totally different job, not this one, where the White House came to a bunch of American civil rights groups and said, hey, can you help us figure out how to use AI to detect fraud in the distribution of pandemic welfare benefits? All the money is being stolen by people and gangs, like international criminal gangs, and we want to use AI to chase them down. And so we gave this presentation about all the ways that that's going to go wrong, right? If you deploy AI in the distribution of public benefits, it's going to falsely flag people, ruin their lives, remove their access to critical benefits. People won't eat, they won't receive their cash benefits, they won't be able to pay their light bills, all because of a potential mistake, right? And so we were explaining this to them, talking through the slides, and they say, all right, well, we just can't use AI for anything then? Like, this is all like so grim. And I was like, no, have you considered using AI to help people though? Like you could actually help people. You could use AI to work out like who is the most likely to not receive benefits that they are entitled to receive? Who is the most who persistently forgets to check that box on a form? Meaning that they end up turning up in person, joining the queue and waiting all day and creating a lot of backflow and causing a lot of friction in the system. And the way that Imogen put it yesterday was that a lot of the choices that are in front of us about adoption, they are political choices, not technological ones. Hopefully that's a good way of paraphrasing what you said. And I think that that distinction is really important when we think about use cases and when we think about what our ambition is. Are we trying to, there are political questions that we have to ask ourselves about who is going to benefit and at whose expense, and what problems it is that we want to solve, and do the really hard and slow and messy work of getting buy-in, building public transparency, building knowledge around what those applications are going to be. That's not a technological question about deeply capable and highly advanced models. The models can do a lot of really interesting scientific things, but they may not still, even in that case, be able to deliver benefits to your grandma on time. And that's a really tough policy problem. So now I will answer the question. Positive adoption scenarios, some of them, I think they are ambitious, but they are not as flashy as you might think. So Oak Academy, for example, just launched an AI lesson planning tool where the entire purpose of this is to save teachers time. And they went through a lot of really rigorous and intense safety work in order to figure out how to make that work. And in fact, some of the feedback that we got was that our models are actually too conservative and too safe. And so they've had to like build other kinds of their own safety techniques because ours were too conservative. In the sense it's like there's a lot of information as a teacher that you may want to include in your curriculum about science and health that our models may not provide you. Because that context, we're not able to navigate that context sufficiently. So anyway, the point is that even in use cases that seem relatively straightforward, like let's automate lesson planning, save a load of teachers a lot of time so that they can be devoted to some of that in-person, more human, more creative work with students in person, that even that work requires a huge, huge technical lift and is very, very complicated. From an engineering perspective and from a safety perspective. And so yeah, please talk to the Oak Academy team if that's interesting to you. There are also some use cases around the way that teams within government are using AI systems, including our models for legislative drafting, a lot of the document summary, a lot of analysis, creating higher value outputs, which is what I think maybe one of you mentioned. It's not about like cutting costs or removing jobs or removing people, but about increasing the value of the outputs that people are already working toward. And so I think both of those examples are just like really text-based, really context-based, really heavy, with clear inputs and a lot of really organized training data. And those are the kind of problems that we think that we can make a lot of progress on. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Let me actually play the thing you said in the beginning of your answer to Chi. You said technology adoption is political. Yeah. And it's kind of political choices and the way we steer technology adoption that creates winners or losers or creates more benefits or fewer benefits. This feels like quite a new debate. Like it feels like we don't have a public discussion yet around, maybe we have it around social media, but we don't have a discussion around how to implement technology in the best possible way. How do we How do you see, as an MP, how do you see this discussion going?
Well, that's a really interesting question. We don't have and I think it goes to the point I was trying to make earlier, that I think we need a better and higher level of discussion and debate about science and technology. And one of the reasons why, in fact, I actually worked for Ofcom when the internet was first sort of coming to our attention, if you like, and which was, I worked for Ofcom from 2004, 2010, and there was a very clear sort of mandate or requirement, if you like, from the Labour government of that time through the chair of Ofcom not to regulate the internet on the basis that regulation would stifle innovation. I think, and I think that's, I mean, which you can argue about for the 2000, I think you can argue a bit about that from 2004 to 2010 when I was there, but by the time, the Conservative government came in, the Conservative government continued that from 2010 to 2022, I mean, the online harms bill actually isn't fully in place yet. So I think one of the reasons why we don't have a discussion about how to implement technology is that because there isn't, a libertarian or neoliberal sort of view that technology, is something that happens. It's the market. It's there. If you've got to get out of the way, that's all government needs to do. Get out of the way, and technology and the market will do all the rest. And I think there is, and the internet is an example of what's driving a view that maybe that's not right after all, and maybe getting out of the way is actually a political decision, and that means that the implementation of the technology happens in a way which isn't shaped by the public interest, but is shaped by other forces. And as someone who's worked both in the private sector and in the regulation, and as a member of Parliament, every choice that is made, or the absence of making any choice, is a political choice. And so when just to get sort of an example of that with AI, to say, as Labour has said, that we will look to regulate sort of the biggest large language models, which can have the most benefits, but also threats. That's a clear choice that says that. To those companies that they need to be safeguards there for the public interest. Now, it's complicated because we talk about use cases, and the level and nature of regulation may well be different in different sectors where the risks are different, for example, and in the world of work. Where we see algorithms being used for recruitment and for embedding biases in terms of existing. Funnily enough, the most likely successful candidate for an engineering job is a man. That's because 80% of engineers or something are men. But an algorithm which reflects that, which learns from that reality and reflects that, is embedding bias and discrimination. So I think the first thing to say is to recognize that we impact technology, we can impact technology, we shape it, and we should be shaping it in the public interest. And then the second is to have those conversations about what that means in practice on basis of specific technologies and specific use cases.
Amazing, great, I think it's also a message to think tanks like us to do like sector-specific work and really think through how we can steer it in different contexts. I want to come back to you three as well, but I also want to give people here an opportunity to ask questions, so you can respond to this in your answers to these questions as well. Okay, let's collect like perhaps three at a time. Over here. Oh yeah, thank you.
First of all, thanks everyone. That was really fascinating. So my question is about diffusion and adoption. I agree that that's where like all of the gains in terms of productivity and better public services are. I think I wonder if there's a difference here where how the speed of new models means that it's going to be hard to restructure our workflows continually. Like if we were restructuring our workflows around 3.5, that's very different to 4. That's very different to if we've got like a plug-in remote worker in a few years. So how do we do that? How do we deal with that? The difference in time between restructuring workflows and the speed of new releases. Also, I guess like O1 shows the need that, inference is now going to be scaled up massively. So we were able to get away with not having many data centers in the UK because training could be done elsewhere. Now we're going to need way more data centers in the UK so we can do this inference locally. How do we do that when we've got energy costs that are like 3 times the US or other bits of Europe? What do we need to do there? And then the third point, at least partly, this is going to have to be done by the government, but I'm sure we're all aware of the pause on compute funding, that was announced a few months ago. So how do we make the case for the Treasury about adoption, but the need for more of this infrastructure, and then the role that government is going to have to play in funding at least part of that?
Great, thanks. 2 more? Person over there.
Hi, yeah, great talk. So 2 linked questions, I suppose wrapped up under one question, which is, do you agree that the sort of the value prop for AI as a driver of productivity growth is actually a really high stakes bet? And so the reason I want to say that is, if you speak to most businesses in this country, they'll tell you that the biggest constraint on productivity growth is lack of access to skills. And if you're a government and your first play to kind of solve that problem is probably immigration rather than speculative tech. And so there's a political choice probably being made there. And then secondly, I think if you look at adoption rates, particularly at scale of AI and ML technologies, they're really all driven by tech companies. So companies that don't suffer from the cold start problem of having to systemize data, organize it, and then do something useful with it with technology that you already understand. And so if part of the big play here is increasing productivity output in the state, then how do you go from a kind of platform type business, which is a really novel business architecture, and sort of superimpose that onto the state, which is kind of anything but a novel business architecture?
Great, thanks very much. Great question. One more. Great, gentleman at the back.
Hi there. With increased productivity, I guess some companies will see either they have 2 options, one being, great, my employees have more productivity, I can offer them now greater flexibility, perhaps a 4-day working week, etc. Or others might think, great, I've got an extra day a week work out of all my employees. How do you envision shaping that conversation? And I guess it's just a progressive versus the alternative view.
Right, so that's a question on like how do we make it benefit workers, basically. So it doesn't, okay, great. Amazing. Let me start with James. So a question on the models improving continuously. How do you build a continuous innovation pipeline that doesn't mean like you have to change it all the time? I think maybe perhaps also this platform question, or like is the public sector a bit different?
Yeah, and I think they link because I'm reading a great book at the moment just out by Richard Pope called Platform Land, which is about, subtitle is something like an anatomy of modern public services. And what he's trying to do in that book is describe today what the state should look like in a way. What is the operating model? How should you think about and sort of visualize public services in a digital world? And the point is that they are very different, and they are built from, contemporary public services are built from components, many of which are shared. They look much more like platforms, to your point. Whereas, of course, we know that the majority of the state at the moment still doesn't look remotely like that, right? It looks like big hierarchical departments that don't have the kind of organizational agility to take on new technologies, learn how to use them, improve the user experience, etc. You work with data in much more iterative ways than the state has traditionally been able to do. So I do think, and that was a problem long before AI. We've been working very hard for well over a decade now to try to get the state to adopt sort of more of a platform-like way of operating, I suppose. And if anything, AI just sort of ups the stakes, that it means ever more that if you're going to run big hierarchical bureaucracies, they're going to be brittle, they're going to be slow, they're going to fall behind the private sector, which has taken on these kind of new ways of structuring organizations and just working with much more agility. So I think in a way it just ups the stakes on digital transformation in government even more so, and means we just can't
How hard
afford.
is it? It's easy to like say, okay, let's just go to a platform model, but why have they not done it yet? How hard is it?
How hard is it?
And what do you mean by a platform model? You know, what is the platform for the state?
So it would be things like investing in more shared capabilities. So things like validation, for example. You know, often when you interact with many different services, they ask you to prove who you are. And at the moment, each of those services has its own, by and large, has its own way of doing that. And so you're asked repeatedly. And so for similar reasons, you're asked repeatedly the same question that every single service you interact with says: where do you live? How old are you? Can you prove the following things about yourself? And this vision is more that you have a single validation service, you have a single notification service, et cetera, and those are shared. And so you're asked once to prove who you are, and then that kind of passports through to the different services you might want, from the benefits you might be entitled to the kind of support for your kids entering school, choosing a school, et cetera. And so it's a much more slick user experience because you're not having to endlessly repeat yourself. It's more secure because the data isn't held in 20 different places. But it's, to your point, it's very countercultural because it means you're not allowing every single government department to run their own validation service and their own notification service. And these things sit at a higher level and are owned centrally in the government. And I mean, it's quite a radical shift in how you think about the way the state is set up, but I think it's sort of ever more important. I might just touch briefly on the point about worker power as well, which I think is relevant to learn from history as well on that one. And obviously one thing we know from the very long run history is that in the end with industrial technologies, we had to set up various kind of institutions and mechanisms to make sure the benefits were shared with workers. And one of those was making sure that people could kind of cash in the benefits as more leisure time, for example, through the creation of weekends, for example. And that kind of pushed back against the tendency to make workers work ever longer hours, and actually said, no, we want to cash in some of the benefits from those technologies as working shorter hours. So I do think there's sort of debate about 4-day working weeks and how do you push down working time in the context of these technologies. It's not a coincidence we're talking about the 4-day working week in the context of AI and other technologies.
Great. Maybe just playing that over to Bhargav quickly, like, what is a progressive vision for AI adoption and the labor market?
The labor market. This is there's one kind of very boring but obvious answer, which is more worker power, which is more ability to unionize. In fact, one of the things which is kind of striking is that a lot of the sectors that are quite affected by labor market disruptions are some of the least unionized sectors. That does not bode well. It just means you have less ability to negotiate. Even in the context of negotiation, if there's a productivity slump, and part of the idea of having higher productivity means that we have now a higher ceiling for wages to bargain for, and you can only do the bargaining if you have strong unions. So even if you have these productivity benefits, but then it gets kind of leached off in middle management, what's the point, in a sense? So the kind of, when we talk to the TUC about like what should be the take on this, it's just like, just unionize to start with, so you have the ability to even start to have these kind of discussions. So that's, I would say, very much like the kind of bottom line, like you just need to do that. You need to have the ability to organize, and you need to have the ability to, whether it's in the context of, like you said, less working hours, or if it's in the context of higher wages, or if it's in the context of surveillance, in the other case of being surveilled by where you work. Luckily, the TUC are working on a worker and AI bill, so hopefully that would be taken into account very seriously. I think in another context of what a progressive vision might look like, of course, everyone's kind of been saying this now, but the dichotomy between augmentation and automation, and getting more augmentation and less replacement of workers is also kind of in the same line. We can expect a focus on, for a long time we've kind of seen labor power being taken away by capital. So kind of addressing this balance in this context, I think would be really, really vital. So all of this in a way has nothing to do with AI in a sense, right? I mean, these are things which are kind of required across the board, but they're especially important in the context of AI, just because it's definitely going to change the way relationships between workers and firms are going to be. So kind of a classic answer, but I think that's what we need.
And check out our report on this, Transformed by AI, where we discuss what an industrial strategy for AI and jobs could look like. That does some of these things. Quickly bring one question to you, which was the one on like the role of big tech.
Yep.
And you are a researcher at a university, but you're also affiliated with Amazon. As a researcher at a university, can you do the kind of work you want to be doing with AI, or is all the progress going to happen in big tech?
No, I think there's a huge role to be played by the academic researchers. So I mean, for example, like evaluating these models for their harmfulness. So I work on the space of detecting social biases and devising methods to mitigate them, as well as to diversify the responses. Because I mean, once you can build a model, but that model has to go and talk to lots of different people with different backgrounds. So even if you're asking the same question, like considering the background of the person who's talking to you, you need to provide different responses, right? So these type of technologies, even the algorithmic, improvements. Like there was a question about how are we going to keep up with continuous changing of models? I mean, we want to adapt AI, but AI keeps changing, right? Now how are we going to do that? So there is certain standardization that needs to happen. So I mean, whenever a new mobile phone comes in, the communication protocols don't change. Right? So you don't have to go and update things just because a new mobile phone comes out. So AI is not at that point at the moment, but we will also have, for example, certain standardized ways of interacting with AI models. You can have a new powerful model, but you have the same API or certain way of interacting with this. So these type of things has to be done not for individual models, but looking at the broader point of view of technology and come up with solutions. So I think academic researchers have a role to play there because they don't have a stake in there in the sense that they are not biased to a particular company or a particular organization building certain things. So I think again the regularization space. So you would want to evaluate whether these regularizations are effective or not. So you would need a person who has an unbiased opinion who can evaluate these regularizations, right? So again, I think there's a particular rule. On the other hand, certain things, you can't do anymore in universities, like training a model like a 70 billion parameter model. We don't have that much of 16,000 H1 machines. You don't get it, right? So you can't do certain things, and so you are kind of refined to doing in-context learning, writing different prompts or modifying things. So there are certain things as well, but I think if you go to any academic conference in machine learning or deep learning, you still see a lot of people from academia publishing in these venues. So there is still a big space for the academia to play.
Okay, great. So a mix between, maybe the niche things can still be done by universities that big tech might not be doing. Great, okay. Let's get to the closing remarks. You might want to respond to anything that's been said, but one thing I'd encourage you to do is what policy area or policy lever are you most excited about with regards to adoption and deployment? It might be something that's not talked about enough, or that you just think will be really crucial that we keep thinking about. So I want to put you on the spot. Anyone wants to start with that? Faces?
I can start.
Great, amazing.
Okay, I'm a policy director, and so I am super excited to get to work on the AI bill. I just think it's cool. It's a cool opportunity, especially relative to American policy, where not only because of election uncertainty, but just because things are so complicated in Congress. They're going to write a lot of bills, and people are going to endorse a lot of bills, and they're going to end up in committee, and they're not going anywhere else. But here, I think it's game time, and it feels like a really great opportunity to really get a lot of very specific ideas on the table about what kind of approach it makes sense here for safety, what the role of the Safety Institute is. Those are really interesting questions that didn't exist even a year ago, a year and a half ago. So it's a very cool time to be working on AI policy. But I do think if that bill remains narrowly focused specifically on frontier AI safety for a limited number of developers, there does need to be a wider policy package, and some of those measures may not be legislative. A lot of the ideas that I think Matt Clifford is working on in the context of the AI Opportunity Review that are going to be relevant to economic growth and public sector adoption don't need to be legislated on. So what are the policy levers that are going to come out through that process that DCIT are going to put forward to make sure that we make progress on that? There could be really low-hanging fruit things like, can we get a list from this government of 10 problems they want to solve? Like 10. Like 10 problems they want to solve that are aligned with mission delivery that we think the AI could be useful for. So then there's a public conversation too about here's the direction that we're going to go in. And people can say, hang on, I don't like that. Or my problems are actually over here. It can't just be a discussion by companies like ours to go into markets and say, well, here are the things that we want to work on and the clients that we want to make the most money from. So I think that the degree to which there is a broader policy vision and a package, including legislation on safety, that can accelerate economic growth and adoption, I think it's going to be really fun. And Hayden, I realize that we didn't get to your question about inference, but we will talk about inference later.
Yeah. So, and in the interest of lunch, which is served back there, maybe let's keep the remaining closing statements quite crisp. Who wants to go next? G, maybe?
I'm happy, yes. So, I mean, there's a lot, I think, and Brittany's absolutely right, that the AI bill, and I'm very excited, obviously, about the new Labour government, and we are bringing sort of a focus and an engagement to some of these questions, which I think has been really missed. But I will just, having to pick one, I will say the digital government, sort of the digital first for public services, and that, because there's a number of reasons why it excites me. As I said, I think government needs to be seen to be embracing AI and technology in order to help our constituents and change the culture in this country, if you like, to make technology more of a positive part of everyone's community. And what is not a positive part of everyone's community also needs public services also need to be that. I was a bit I wasn't quite sure about the question about which assumes that government should be a platform. You know, platforms for me are they are shared hardware or an operating system over which applications run. Government needs to be both local and national. It needs to be, as part of democracy, it needs to reflect the community needs as well as national and regional. So I think we need to have a vision, if you like, of digital government which reflects sort of the democracy in this country. We probably need a conversation about that we are not really having, but the shift to digital government, and I mean, I think what you described was simply, we shouldn't have to enter our data 20 times to have 20 different public services. Absolutely, absolutely right. But digital government can, and an AI assistant which can help you through universal credit application, for example, or identify what your housing needs may be in 20 years' time, or all the ways in which we can take. I think Peter Carr has a thing that every one of us spends at least a week wasting time, if you like, in that interaction with government, because we're either supplying data we've already supplied or answering questions that could be answered automatically, and addressing that. And it will also, just finally, it will also should provide a market for small dynamic businesses in the UK who should be offering, digital solutions or AI solutions, or, to some of the challenges that we are facing.
Amazing. Thanks very much. The positive vision for digital government. Great. Danushka,
yeah. So as a
what's your one favorite policy?
Yeah.
Eric.
As a scientist working on the technologies, I mean, I don't want to see a lot of regulations coming around to build new models, to try new ideas. But on the other hand, there should be policies in place when you put those models in front of general public. So there should be stricter requirements, checking for certain safety mechanisms and so on. So I would like to see this kind of a hybrid policy that would allow innovation, but also, protect the end user's safety.
Amazing. Thanks very much. James, What are you most excited about?
I think the missions are a big opportunity because I think in reflecting on sort of the last 15, 20 years of tech policy in government, there's a slightly, beyond government, we've been strangely submissive in a sense, in that we've sort of allowed the technology and the commercial applications of technology to drive almost everything, right? And as it turns out, on reflection, that kind of took the internet in some sort of slightly strange sort of directions that arguably didn't deliver social value in the way we might have hoped. Whereas with, I think, part of the intent, as I understand it, of Labour's missions is to say, actually, we are opinionated, we have a view on the kind of things we would like to achieve as a society and the kind of world we'd like to build over 10 or more years, decarbonising the grid, et cetera, et cetera. And so we would like to be clear about that, and we would like to invite people to use these technologies to deliver that kind of future. And I think if you can put a genuine sort of some genuine architecture behind that, we're using at Nesta mechanisms like challenge prizes, where you say, we're going to put £1 million on the table if anyone can solve this problem with this technology. Don't care how you solve it, but here's £1 million if anyone can do it. And there's a whole suite of mechanisms like that that you can use. So yeah, I think the sort of missions plus AI is quite an exciting formula.
That's, in fact, exactly the title of our research program on AI, so we should definitely continue talking. Yeah. Bhargav, you have the last word. What are you excited about?
I would say kind of doubling down on when we talk about industrial policy for AI, we kind of know a lot of the problems we're up against. There's also a lot of hidden costs in the kind of environmental context. I think having transparency in this space and kind of figuring out what are the kind of spaces we want to attack, what are the kind of low-hanging fruit, like we just brought up earlier, kind of get some early victories in and build on that. But a kind of very mission-led industrial policy, similar a little bit to what's been going on in the US with the IRA, but maybe in the context of AI. That would be great.
Amazing. So let's envision those positive missions all together. And perhaps even over lunch. Thanks everybody for coming, and stay in touch. Thanks very much.